It started like 100 other traffic stops. A flashing red and blue light. A firm voice over the loudspeaker. Driver, turn off the engine. Step out of the vehicle. But what the officer didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was who he had just pulled over. Because within 5 minutes, the power shifted. The badge didn't matter anymore. The man behind the wheel? He wasn't just another driver. He was John Kennedy. And when he made one simple call, everything changed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't resist. He simply said 8 quiet words that froze the officer in place. I suggest you call your chief. Right now. 5 minutes later, the cuffs were no longer on him. They were on the man who pulled the gun. And the silence that followed spoke louder than any siren. If you believe real power doesn't come from shouting, but from knowing who you are, hit that like button. Subscribe to Endless Stories for more true-life twists that challenge what we think we know. And if this story left you speechless, drop a justice in the comments. Because in this world, sometimes the quietest man in the room is the one holding all the cards. The sun had just begun to sink behind the rooftops of Westfield when Officer Blake Sutton spotted the black BMW 7 Series gliding down Ashbury Avenue. No turn signal. Slightly over the speed limit. It wasn't enough to trigger an arrest, but it was enough for probable cause. And tonight he felt like making a point. He flipped the lights on, slid one hand to his belt, and began the familiar ritual. He liked traffic stops. They reminded him who held the authority. The man behind the wheel pulled over without hesitation, smooth and deliberate, like someone who had nothing to hide, or was very good at pretending. Blake radioed it in, gave his location, and stepped out, one hand already near the holster. The BMW was spotless, its windows tinted within legal limits, but dark enough to obscure the driver's full face. He approached cautiously, flashlight out, tapping the rear light as protocol dictated. The man rolled the window down, slow and steady, revealing a calm, composed face. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, dark suit, eyes direct but unreadable. Evening, officer, the man said. Is there a problem? License and registration, Blake snapped, not answering the question. The man complied without fuss, movements precise, almost mechanical. His name read John A. Kennedy. The ID was state-issued, recent, authentic. Blake blinked once, then looked again. John Kennedy. Goo. He returned to the cruiser, running the plates and license, no warrants, no priors, no record of anything. Just a man with a presidential name and a car worth more than Blake's annual salary. That made his teeth clench. Back at the window, Blake leaned in. You were doing 42 in a 30. You also failed to signal when changing lanes. John Kennedy looked at him evenly. Understood. I'll take the citation. There was something about the tone, firm, respectful, but somehow indifferent. It got under Blake's skin. Step out of the vehicle, sir, he said. Kennedy paused. Excuse me? Step out of the car. Am I being detained? You're being ordered, Blake said. Now. Kennedy took a breath, then slowly opened the door and stepped out. He was tall, poised, his shoes polished, his cufflinks glinting faintly in the fading light. Blake didn't like the way the man stood, too calm, too upright, not nervous enough. He placed a hand on his gun. Hands where I can see them. Officer, Kennedy said, his voice still even. I suggest you call your chief, right now. That stopped Blake cold. His hand froze near the grip. Excuse me? 8 words, Kennedy said quietly. That's all I needed to say. Call your chief. Blake's lips curled. You threatening me?
No, Kennedy replied.
I'm advising you. Before you make a mistake you can't take back. Blake's ego lit up like a fuse. Turn around. Hands on the hood. Officer. Now. Blake drew the weapon. Don't test me. Kennedy didn't move. But he didn't flinch either. Behind them, the street remained quiet. An empty stretch of pavement lined with shuttered storefronts and a church 2 blocks down. Then, Kennedy slowly reached into his inner coat pocket. I'm going to pull out my phone, he said clearly. 2 fingers.
No sudden moves.
Blake shouted. I said hands on the hood. Or, Kennedy said, pressing one button with his thumb, you can speak to your superior. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, muffled, but distinct. Yes, sir. We're tracking you now. Is this the officer? Kennedy held the phone out. It's for you. Blake hesitated, then took it. This is Officer Blake Sutton, badge 317. Who am I speaking to? The voice was calm, older, measured. This is Chief Raymond Lattimore. Blake, put your gun away immediately. Blake blinked. Sir, now. But that man, the chief interrupted, is John A. Kennedy, Deputy General Counsel for the Department of Justice. He reports directly to the Deputy Attorney General. And you just drew a weapon on him during a nonviolent traffic stop. Blake felt the blood drain from his face. Sir, he's been investigating police overreach across 3 states. This stop may already be documented. I want you to apologize, release him, and then wait for Internal Affairs to call. Do you understand? Blake didn't respond. Officer, do you understand? Yes, sir, he whispered. He handed the phone back. Kennedy ended the call without a word. Face the car, Blake said. But his voice was barely audible now. Hands out. Kennedy complied. But a second later, another set of headlights turned the corner. A black SUV with government plates and tinted windows. Parked without ceremony. 2 plainclothes agents stepped out, badges in hand. Officer Sutton? One said. You're being placed under investigation for misconduct and improper use of force. Please hand over your service weapon. Wait, Blake stammered. This was a routine. Sir, the agent said firmly. Place your weapon on the ground. It hit the pavement with a hollow metallic sound. The second agent cuffed Blake's hands behind his back. His own cuffs. His own humiliation. The neighborhood was still silent. But the power had shifted. Kennedy didn't say a word as he stepped back into his car.
No anger. No triumph.
Just calm detachment, like a man who'd seen this story play out before and was tired of reading the ending. As he drove away, Blake stood frozen, hands bound, breath shallow. The siren in his cruiser remained off. The real noise, the only sound that mattered, was the click of the handcuffs locking behind him, and the 8 words that unraveled his authority. I suggest you call your chief, right now. By noon the next day, the story had already hit every screen in America. Not because it was rare, but because this time someone had filmed it. A grainy cell phone video, taken from across the street by a teenager on a skateboard, showed everything. The calm approach, the drawn weapon, the moment John Kennedy spoke into his phone, the silence that followed, and then, most damning of all, the sight of Officer Blake Sutton being cuffed and led away by federal agents. His own badge clipped from his chest like a stain being wiped clean. The caption read, "When power meets real authority." Within hours, #John Kennedy trended #1 nationwide. Cable networks replayed the video on loop, dissecting every frame. Commentators debated race, class, protocol, pride, and pain. Some called Kennedy a hero. Others called him a setup. Everyone had an opinion. But the man at the center of it? He wasn't watching. He was in a glass-walled office on the 15th floor of the DOJ building in D.C., staring out over the Potomac with the same detached stillness that had disarmed a weapon the night before. A knock came. Kennedy turned slightly. "Come in." A woman stepped inside, folder in hand, blazer crisp, her voice all business. "You knew that was going to happen," she said. Not accusing, not asking, stating. "I knew there was a pattern," he replied. "Didn't expect it to play out in full color." She placed the folder on the desk. Sutton's record came through. For complaints in the last 18 months. All buried. All closed without escalation. Kennedy opened the folder. One woman accused him of threatening her boyfriend during a stop. Another claimed excessive force. But no body cam footage. No follow-up. "Until now," she said. "Now we have federal video, third-party footage, audio logs, and the call from the chief himself." Kennedy nodded, slow and thoughtful. I didn't provoke him. You didn't have to, she said. You exist. He closed the folder and leaned back in the chair. I wonder if he'll admit it. To internal affairs? Never. To himself? Maybe. She hesitated, then added, The AG wants you to speak. Press briefing. Personal statement. No, Kennedy said simply. Sir, it's your story. It's not a story, he replied. It's a moment. One that doesn't belong to me anymore. With respect, she said. That moment might change careers, policy, maybe lives. He looked at her, eyes calm but heavy. Let the silence do its work. She left without pushing further. He sat for a long time after, the folder unopened again, the room quiet except for the hum of a faraway HVAC vent and the occasional siren echoing through the city below. That night, in a dim apartment overlooking Logan Circle, John poured a glass of whiskey he wouldn't drink. On the shelf behind him were 3 framed photos, a younger version of himself in a Marine Corps uniform, his parents smiling in sepia, and a group shot from law school, all sharp suits and ambitions. He reached for none of them. Instead, he opened a locked drawer beneath the shelf and took out a sealed envelope. Inside it were 2 things. A faded ID badge from his days embedded with civil rights investigations in Georgia, and a newspaper clipping from 12 years ago, folded and frayed. The headline read, Decorated prosecutor wrongfully detained in Baltimore, no charges filed. He ran a thumb across the print. The story never made it past the local edition.
No cell phone footage. No social media outrage.
Just a man in a tailored suit being mistaken for a threat on his way home. That had been his first time. The silence afterward, his own. The shame, private. The rage, buried. But he remembered the words the officer had said then, too. Didn't look like a lawyer. Now, all these years later, it had happened again. Same posture. Same assumption. Only this time the world had watched. Not because he wanted it to, but because he'd learned how to wait. How to prepare. How to hold power quietly, like a blade still in its sheath. The press kept calling. CNN, MSNBC, even a cautious inquiry from Fox. He declined them all. He wasn't interested in being a symbol. Symbols got worshipped or destroyed. Neither option suited him. He wanted process, reform, truth with receipts. And that didn't come from viral clips, it came from rooms with closed doors and opened files. The following morning, the Department of Justice announced an immediate review of traffic stop policies in 5 precincts across 3 states. Civilian oversight boards were authorized new funding, and Officer Blake Sutton was officially placed under federal investigation, pending criminal charges. When asked for comment, John Kennedy released a single written sentence. Sometimes, silence speaks loudest when it is finally heard. It wasn't a soundbite. It was a signal. In a small precinct in Westfield, Blake sat alone in an empty conference room.
No badge. No belt.
Just a lawyer across the table and a union rep watching the clock. You didn't know who he was? The lawyer asked. Blake shook his head. He looked smug, like he knew more than me. He did, the lawyer said flatly. He works for the DOJ. Blake stared at the wall. He didn't even yell. He didn't have to. The officer slumped forward. They're going to make an example of me. The lawyer didn't respond. Across town, in a small neighborhood cafe, John Kennedy sat with Claire Mitchell, an old friend, one of the few people who knew both the lawyer and the man beneath the title. She stirred her tea slowly. You okay? No, he said. But I'm here. Why didn't you resist? She asked softly. You could have lawyered him into the ground right there. He looked out the window. Because that's what he expected. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is not give them the reaction they're trained to handle. She nodded. You think he'll change? I think he'll feel something for the first time in a long time. Shame. Maybe, John said. Or fear. Either way, it's a start. The world kept spinning. The hashtags faded. The noise shifted to the next outrage. But somewhere in the middle of it all, a man named John Kennedy carried on, quiet, steady, and deliberate. Not as a victim, not as a martyr, but as a reminder that sometimes justice doesn't shout. It waits. The hearing wasn't public. It wasn't televised. It wasn't even listed on the Department of Justice's official schedule. Just a discreet, unadorned conference room on the 6th floor, 3 security checkpoints deep, with no windows and no press badges allowed. They called it a strategic review panel. But John Kennedy knew better. It was what happened when the story got too loud, when the system had to protect itself from its own reflection. The table was long, polished, and too clean. 7 seats were filled when he entered. 4 men, 3 women, none of whom wore uniforms but all of whom carried themselves like they never had to explain who they were. He sat at the far end without being invited, his back straight, hands folded loosely in his lap. No lawyer, no assistant, just him, and silence. The man at the center of the table, Deputy Undersecretary Miles Brenner, adjusted his glasses and began without preamble. "Mr. Kennedy, thank you for making time." John didn't respond. The words were formal. The tone wasn't grateful. Brenner continued, "You've worked under this department for 17 years, served with distinction, multiple commendations. You've led inquiries into local enforcement misconduct across 6 states. And most recently, you were involved in an incident that has, frankly, ignited a national media storm." Still, John said nothing. A woman across the table, sleek blazer, ivory pen, calculated detachment, leaned forward. "Mr. Kennedy, do you believe your actions during the Westfield traffic stop were appropriate, given your position?" "Define appropriate," he said evenly. "You didn't identify yourself," she replied. "You didn't de-escalate. You didn't even issue a warning." "I wasn't required to," he answered. "I wasn't on duty. I wasn't carrying a badge. I was on my own time, in my own vehicle, obeying the law." Another man chimed in. "But surely you can understand the optics. A DOJ attorney involved in the public arrest of a local officer who pulled a gun on me without provocation," John said, his voice not raised, but sharp enough to slice through the table. "Who gave an unlawful command. Who ignored protocol, profile-based assumptions, and federal jurisdiction." He let the words settle, then added, "I suggest we not forget who the subject of that video was." Brenner leaned back slightly. "No one's forgetting anything, Mr. Kennedy. What we're doing is assessing the fallout. And right now, every politician with an agenda has their teeth in this case. Some want blood. Some want a statue of you on the Capitol lawn. We're here to decide if you're still the right person to be leading sensitive investigations while your name is on every news ticker in America." John smiled without warmth. "You're not assessing fallout. You're managing embarrassment." That stopped the room. A man to his right shifted in his chair, adjusting his tie like it had gotten suddenly tighter. The woman with the ivory pen tapped it once against her notepad, then said, "We've had proposals." "What kind?" John asked. "Public statement. A measured one. You express regret for how the encounter escalated. Clarify that your position does not exempt you from standard procedure. That you understand the stress law enforcement is under right now. In other words," John said, "I help them save face." "You help preserve your department's neutrality," she replied. "No," he said, "I'd be lying. And I don't do that under oath or under pressure." Brenner interjected, "Mr. Kennedy, we're not asking you to take blame. We're asking you to consider the broader picture. You've become a flashpoint." "Not by choice," John answered. "I didn't ask to be pulled over. I didn't provoke the weapon. I didn't leak the footage. The world saw the truth. If that truth is inconvenient, maybe it's not me who needs reviewing." For a moment, no one said a word. Then the man to Brenner's left cleared his throat. "There's another option," he said slowly. "Temporary reassignment. Step back from public-facing work. Let things cool. We'll keep your pay, your clearance. But off-record." "And what message does that send?" John asked. "That if you're a black man in America, even when you do everything right, the best you can hope for is to be politely sidelined?" "You're twisting this," Brenner said, a trace of heat slipping through. "No,"
John replied calmly.
You are. I'm not the embarrassment here. The behavior is. The woman with the pen leaned forward again. You're principled, Mr. Kennedy. No one questions that. But at this level, perception becomes policy. Control becomes survival. If we can't count on your cooperation, you can count on my integrity, he said. If that's no longer enough, you're welcome to take my badge. A long pause followed. The kind of pause where careers hang in the air like dust in sunlight. Brenner finally exhaled. This meeting is concluded. John stood slowly, collecting nothing. I'll be in my office, working, until told otherwise. He turned and walked out. No one tried to stop him. Outside the room, the hallway felt colder, wider, less claustrophobic. A junior staffer glanced up from her desk as he passed, eyes wide, respect plain in her posture. John nodded once and kept walking. Back in his office, he sat down, removed his tie, and opened the file labeled Internal Review, Chicago PD. Another case, another storm, another silence waiting to be broken. 30 minutes later, Claire appeared at the doorway. You're still here. Where else would I be? She stepped in, closed the door. You know they're going to keep pushing. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you proved what they didn't want seen. Then they'll get used to being uncomfortable, he said. You know what that makes you, right? She asked. A symbol. No, he said. Just a man doing his job. While they all hope I flinch. Claire walked closer, placed a file on his desk. You have a meeting with the New York team tomorrow. Internal Task Force on Racial Targeting. It's yours now. He looked up. Good. Let's get back to work. Outside, DC kept moving. A city of suits and stories, where power changed hands behind closed doors. But in one quiet room, a man who refused to flinch kept writing the kind of truth that didn't need cameras to explode. The story had cooled just enough for ambition to strike. 3 weeks after the Westfield incident, John Kennedy's name no longer dominated headlines. Hashtags had moved on, panels had shifted topics, and the algorithms had swallowed the silence. But behind the public quiet, a darker noise had begun to grow. Whispered conversations, calculated memos, and legal language sharpened like knives. It started with a news segment. Not national, but close enough. A cable host with slick hair and a practiced sneer leaned into the camera as footage of Kennedy flashed behind him. Tonight, we ask the question the DOJ refuses to address. Was John Kennedy targeted? Or was this part of a long-running federal overreach campaign? Our exclusive guest tonight, State Senator Carl Hensley. John had heard of Hensley, ex-prosecutor turned populist darling. Known for making noise. Known for siding with police unions even when the facts bled. He watched the clip in silence as Hensley leaned forward in studio, voice calm but loaded. I'm not here to attack Mr. Kennedy, he said. I respect his service. But when federal agents show up at a small-town precinct and arrest a decorated officer based on one man's phone call, that should concern everyone. The host nodded theatrically. Some would say that's exactly what accountability looks like. Hensley smiled. Accountability isn't mob justice. And I think it's time we start asking, who's watching the watchers? John turned off the screen. The game had started. They weren't going after the truth. They were going after the perception. That same night, Claire called. Her voice was tight. Did you see the Hensley segment? Yes. It's not just TV, she said. He's backing a legal petition. He wants a full ethics review into your Westfield conduct. He can't, John said. I wasn't on duty. There's no jurisdiction. Doesn't matter. They're framing it as abuse of implied authority. That you used your position to intimidate a local officer. John was silent. They're calling it shadow badging, she added. It's not real law. It's media language. But it sticks. John closed his eyes for a moment. Let them come. You can't fight this like a case file, Claire warned. They're not after facts. They're after public doubt. If they shake that hard enough, it won't matter what's true. The next morning, a manila envelope arrived at his office. No stamp, no name, Inside were 3 photos, blurry, from a distance. All of him. One outside his apartment. One entering a coffee shop. One sitting at a park bench. No note. Just the message, "We see you." John showed them to Claire. She looked at them like a woman familiar with warnings. "They're not going to shoot you," she said. "They're going to bury you. Death by insinuation. Frame you as angry, arrogant, dangerous. Then I won't give them anything to use." "John," she said gently, "you already did. You exist." That week, the ethics inquiry moved forward. Hensley's office leaked an unverified memo claiming that Kennedy had instructed agents to arrest Officer Sutton before legal process was complete. The DOJ denied it. The agents issued statements. The call logs disproved everything. But the damage? Already done. A sheriff's group launched a campaign calling for Kennedy's removal. Billboards popped up across southern states. "We back the badge, not federal intimidation." Meanwhile, Kennedy kept working. He filed motions, closed cases, approved budgets. But every hallway conversation got quieter when he entered. Every elevator ride shorter. At night, he returned to his apartment, stared at the blinking cursor on his laptop where his resignation letter would be. If he ever wrote it. He didn't, but he thought about it. One evening, after a full day of legal prep, Kennedy returned to his building and found a man waiting near the entrance. Lean, late 40s, crew cut, black jacket, no expression. "Can I help you?" John asked. "You're John Kennedy?" "Yes. You made my brother's life hell." John frowned. "Who's your brother?" "Blake Sutton," the man said. "You destroyed his name, his job, his future." John took a breath. "Your brother pulled a gun on an unarmed civilian during a peaceful stop. The system held him accountable." "The system?" The man spat. "You are the system. Then maybe the system finally did something right." The man stepped closer, but stopped short. "You think this is over? They're not done with you." "Neither am I," John said. The man held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned and walked off into the night. Kennedy didn't move. He waited 10 full minutes before going inside. The next day, he was called into a meeting. Not the internal review room, this one was bigger, brighter. On the walls, photographs of every attorney general since 1900. At the head of the table sat the deputy AG herself, precise, brilliant, and not easily impressed. She didn't rise when he entered, just gestured to the seat across from her. "They want you out," she said. "I know. Some of them are pushing for a voluntary resignation to preserve integrity." "Would that work?" he asked. "No," she said. "They'll find another target next week. But this week, it's you." He folded his hands. "Do you want me out?" "I want truth," she said. "But I also want this department to survive. And right now, your presence makes survival harder." "Then say it," he said calmly. "If you want my resignation, I'll sign it." She looked at him carefully. "Do you want to resign?" "No." "Then don't," she said. "But don't expect applause." "I never did." She leaned forward. "John, they'll come at you sideways. Through your past, your family, your friends. They'll frame your silence as arrogance, your composure as guilt, your facts as spin. Then I'll hold the line. Even if it costs you everything?" He nodded. "Especially then." She didn't smile, but she didn't stop him either. As he left the room, Claire was waiting down the hall. "Well?" she asked. "They're not protecting me," he said. "They're watching me. Closely. Then you better stay unshakable." He looked out the window, saw a group of interns laughing on the street below. Young, bright, hopeful, just like he once was. "Let them dig," he said. "Everything they find will be true. But none of it will break me." "Why?" Claire asked. "Because I didn't climb this far just to fall. I climbed to stand. And this time no one would move him. The Senate chamber wasn't built for truth. It was built for optics. Cameras were everywhere. Perched on tripods embedded in marble, operated from glass booths above the gallery. Red lights blinked in silent rhythm as America watched what looked like a courtroom but functioned more like theater. The hearing had been called under the guise of investigative oversight into federal conduct and local enforcement relations. But no one was fooled. It was a trial not of a crime but of a man. And John Kennedy knew it. He arrived alone, wearing a plain charcoal suit, no DOJ pins, no entourage, no notes. As he walked the long corridor toward the main chamber, aides and interns parted without being told. Their silence wasn't fear. It was reverence wrapped in uncertainty. People didn't know what to make of him anymore, legend, threat, or both. Inside, the room buzzed with low whispers. Reporters tapped furiously. Staffers double-checked seating. The dais was already filled with senators, most flipping through prepared remarks or looking down into screens. At the center, sitting like a king in a bad play, was Senator Carl Hensley. He wore a dark blue tie with tiny white stars and carried himself with the casual arrogance of a man who had never been told no by someone who mattered. Hensley rapped the gavel. "This hearing will come to order." A staffer called the name. Mr. John A. Kennedy, Deputy General Counsel, Department of Justice. John stood and stepped forward. He raised his hand, swore the oath, and sat. There was no table barrier. Just him under lights in a chair meant to isolate. Hensley smiled as he leaned in. "Mr. Kennedy, thank you for appearing today. We recognize that your time is valuable. As is, of course, your reputation." John met his gaze calm. "Senator, let's begin with the facts," Hensley said. "You were pulled over on the evening of April 3rd. Do you dispute that?" "No." "Do you acknowledge that Officer Blake Sutton was unaware of your federal role at the time of the stop?"
I do.
"Then explain this for me," Hensley said, raising a document. "Why did you make a phone call that resulted in his immediate arrest, before any internal review, before any inquiry, and without a warrant?" "Because protocol was breached," John said. "I followed DOJ procedure. I called my superior. He contacted the appropriate authorities. They responded based on the officer's conduct, not my title." "But you used your title," Hensley pushed. "You used your access. That's not due process. That's influence." "Senator," John said evenly. "The officer drew a firearm on an unarmed, compliant civilian during a non-violent stop. He issued unlawful commands. He violated department guidelines. The only thing that prevented escalation was my restraint." A murmur rippled through the room. Cameras zoomed in. Hensley leaned back, adjusting his microphone. "So you're saying the system worked?" "No," John replied. "I'm saying I worked. The system didn't. I knew who to call. I knew what to say. I had proof. That's not justice. That's privilege wrapped in professionalism." Another senator spoke next, a woman from Oregon. "Mr. Kennedy, do you believe this incident reflects a larger pattern in law enforcement culture?" John didn't hesitate. "Yes, but it also reflects a pattern in how we respond. We look for exceptions. We invent vocabulary, shadow badging, overreach, optics, anything to avoid the truth. That a black man can be compliant, calm, and correct, and still be seen as a threat." The room held its breath. Hensley smiled again, colder now. "Tell me, Mr. Kennedy, were you angry?" "I was disappointed," John answered. "Did you feel tempted to fight back?" "No, because that's what he expected." "And what should he have expected?" "Accountability," John said. "Not just from me, from the system that trained him." "And if he had pulled the trigger?" Hensley asked. "What would your restraint have earned you then?" "A folded flag," John replied, "and a speech about how tragic it all was." The gallery went still. The only sound was the soft clicking of keys as reporters scrambled to capture every syllable. Hensley looked down at his papers, lips tight. "You speak well, Mr. Kennedy. I speak honestly. Let me ask you something else. Do you believe Officer Sutton is racist?" John took a breath. "I believe he saw a threat where there wasn't one. Whether that was racism or conditioning, I can't say. But the result was the same. And that's what matters." "You didn't answer the question," Hensley said. I answered what should be the question, John countered. Not what's politically convenient. The senator across from Hensley, an older black man from Georgia, finally spoke. He'd remained quiet until now, watching, listening. Mr. Kennedy, he said, when you made that call, when you told the officer to speak to his chief, what were you thinking? John looked him in the eye. That I'd rather trust the chain of command than the barrel of a gun. The man nodded slowly. And that's why you're still here. The hearing ended 3 hours later. The cameras cut. The lights dimmed. But the moment didn't fade. Not in the room. Not in the country. Not in the minds of every viewer who saw a man refuse to play their game. And still win. Outside, reporters swarmed. But John said nothing. Claire was waiting near the exit. She didn't ask how it went. She didn't have to. You looked like stone up there, she said. Not stone, he replied. Steel. They walked to the car as the sun began to fall behind the Capitol dome. They'll double down now, she said. Try to frame it as grandstanding. Let them, he said. They gave me the mic. I just told the truth. So what now? Now, John said. We make it impossible for them to pretend they didn't hear it. The hearing hadn't ended when the cameras cut. It had simply changed locations. Overnight, Kennedy's testimony became national oxygen. Replayed on television, clipped on social media, folded into college debates and cable crossfire. The full sentence, I'd rather trust the chain of command than the barrel of a gun, was printed in bold across digital front pages from New York to Sacramento. But as expected, the backlash moved just as fast. Not from activists, not from the public, from somewhere higher, more calculated, less visible. The next morning, Claire knocked softly on his office door before entering without waiting. She didn't need permission anymore. Not today. Her expression was tight, controlled. She handed him a stack of printouts. They're going after your past. Kennedy scanned the top document. A scanned complaint from nearly 12 years ago. Where did they get this? Leaked. It's not even open to the press docket. Someone pulled it from sealed HR archives. Probably Hensley's team. This case was resolved, John said. It was false. Thrown out in arbitration. Doesn't matter. They're not arguing facts. They're building a pattern. He flipped through more. An out-of-context memo from his early days in the Civil Rights Division. A photo of him at a protest in 2016, cropped to make him look confrontational, though he'd been there as a DOJ observer. He stopped at the last one. A letter. They found my college disciplinary record, he murmured. Claire didn't look surprised. It's going to be all over the next debate cycle, framing you as a radical dressed as a bureaucrat. They're trying to delegitimize the message by muddying the messenger. Exactly. So they're scared. Yes. And very smart about how they show it. He looked out the window. Beyond the glass, the city moved without pause. Couriers, interns, elected officials in dark cars. All of them part of a machine that, depending on the day, could either honor or erase you. I knew this would come, John said. You didn't know it would be this personal. It always becomes personal when the truth hurts. What do we do? Claire asked. We hold, he said. We don't defend the old stories. We stay focused on what they're trying to distract from. You think they'll stop at headlines? No, he said. They'll come for my clearance next. And they did. 48 hours later, Kennedy was called into a closed-door meeting with internal oversight. No prior notice. No formal summons. Just an email marked urgent. And a room with 4 nameplates and 1 empty chair. The man who led the meeting was Assistant Inspector Thomas Ward, career internal security, pale-eyed and politically agnostic. He spoke slowly, carefully. Mr. Kennedy, we're conducting a standard review of your clearance status in light of recent public scrutiny. I haven't violated any security protocols, John replied. That's not in question. Then what is? Ward glanced at a screen. Your ability to perform duties while under significant public distraction and ethical ambiguity. Those are the words used. By whom? It wasn't signed. John let that hang in the air. You know I'm clean. Ward nodded. I do. But my opinion doesn't keep your clearance intact. Is this a warning or a threat? Neither, Ward said. It's a pressure test. And you're not supposed to know who's applying it. Then tell them this, John said, voice low. I've spent 17 years walking this wire, between justice and survival, between truth and compromise. If they think I'll resign because someone misquoted a protest photo from 8 years ago, they haven't been paying attention. Ward said nothing for a moment, then closed his folder and stood. You'll be notified by Friday. Until then, full access remains. But don't be surprised if your phone gets a little quieter. And it did. Emails got shorter. Invitations disappeared. 2 standing meetings were rescheduled indefinitely. Kennedy didn't complain. He didn't chase. He doubled down. He walked into his office each morning with no entourage, reviewed misconduct reports, signed oversight briefings, took calls from district attorneys, and replied to letters from the public, especially the handwritten ones from young men who said, "You looked like me. You didn't flinch. So I won't either." But Claire noticed the weight building behind his eyes. One Thursday evening, after everyone else had gone home, she brought 2 coffees into his office and sat across from him without speaking. He finally looked up. They're trying to make me choose. Between what? Between silence and self-defense. And what will you choose? He held her gaze. Neither. I'll keep doing the work. That's my statement. You sure you're not burning out? I'm sure I'm burning through, he said. And they can feel it. That weekend, a strange thing happened. Package arrived at his apartment. No return address. Inside, a handwritten note and an old recording, a CD of all things. The note was brief. He wasn't the only one. Westfield's been hiding more. I couldn't say it then. I can now. Listen to the second minute. You'll understand. B.W. John played the CD. It was audio from a cruiser night shift late last year. Blake Sutton's voice, unmistakable. He was laughing. Some of these guys, man. You see M in the beamer, you already know. Gotta let M know early who's in charge. Another voice chimed in. You're gonna get written up, man. Sutton. They don't write me up. They write me thank you notes. There it was. Entitlement in stereo. Not just racism certainty. The CD was more than a clue. It was fuel. Claire helped him verify the file's authenticity, trace the sender. A former dispatcher who'd been forced out quietly. She was willing to go public now. The story, already loud, had not ended. It was waiting. Kennedy stood by the window again, arms folded, eyes on the street. They came digging, he said, and gave me the shovel instead. Claire joined him. So now what? He looked ahead, face calm, voice steady. Now I build the grave for their silence. It was a DOJ summit, not a courtroom. But it felt the same. Rows of federal officials, policy directors, regional prosecutors, and agency liaisons filled the tiered auditorium like an audience waiting for either a lecture or a reckoning. They didn't know which. On the wall above the stage, the department's seal glinted under fluorescent lights. A blindfolded figure, a scale, a sword. No camera crews this time. No media pass holders. This was internal. But everyone knew nothing in Washington stayed that way for long. John Kennedy stood backstage, holding the CD in his left hand and a stack of printed transcripts in his right. Claire was beside him, calm but alert. You don't have to nuke them, she said. You could pass it to oversight quietly. Let it work its way through channels. And in 6 months, he replied. They'll bury it next to my career. She didn't argue. She just fixed his tie. Then go say what no one else will. When his name was called, he stepped into the light, the room dimming slightly behind him. He approached the podium without notes, without projection slides, without introduction. Just a man who had been silent long enough. He began quietly. For weeks ago, I sat in a Senate chamber and answered questions meant to question who I am. I answered calmly. I answered completely. But they weren't listening for truth. They were listening for a stumble, a crack, anything they could use to say, see? He's not what you thought. He paused. I didn't stumble. So now, they're looking somewhere else. Digging through years of my life to find dirt deep enough to bury my credibility. A murmur started, then hushed. He held up the disc. But while they dug, someone else remembered something. And gave me this. He played it. Not the whole thing, just the clip. Just long enough for the room to hear Blake Sutton's voice joking about the guys in the BMWs, and how he never got written up, only thanked. When it ended, John let the silence breathe. Then he laid the transcript down on the podium. This is not an isolated moment. It is not a rogue actor. It is a culture. And we've all been complicit, whether by silence, by delay, or by excuse. Someone shifted uncomfortably in the second row. Another cleared his throat. I know what's coming, John continued. There will be internal memos tomorrow. There will be questions about chain of custody, about context, about tone. And I'm here to tell you now, it doesn't matter. Because what you heard wasn't just a joke. It was clarity. It was truth that slipped out unguarded. The kind that lives under the surface of procedures and mission statements. He leaned forward slightly. And it almost killed me. He told them, for the first time, what it felt like. The moment Sutton pulled the gun. How time didn't slow down, it sped up. How his instincts warred with his restraint. How the face of the man with the badge looked not like authority, but like danger. And how he stood still anyway. I didn't call in favors to get him arrested, he said. I made one phone call because I knew if I blinked, I'd be the one on the ground, dead or cuffed. And I wasn't ready to die for someone else's assumption. Claire watched from the wings. She wasn't smiling. She was bracing. This department has asked me to stay quiet, he said. To not inflame public discourse or jeopardize pending reviews. But here's what no one wants to say out loud. Silence is the jeopardy. Silence is the compromise. Every day we delay accountability, we confirm that justice is optional, and that it expires when inconvenient. He took a slow breath. I'm not asking for applause. I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking that we finally, honestly, act like the justice system belongs to all Americans. Not just the ones whose skin doesn't scare someone at a traffic stop. The room was dead still now. No one moved. No one even whispered. John scanned the audience. I'll probably lose my clearance after today. I may be asked to resign. So be it. But I want it on record. I didn't back down. I didn't bend. And if my silence was the price of staying, then I was never supposed to stay at all. He stepped back from the podium. The sound of his shoes echoed as he walked off stage. The CD still in hand, now quiet. The summit moderator hesitated, then approached the mic. But before he could speak, someone in the gallery stood up. Then another. Then another. It wasn't choreographed. No one had prompted them. But one by one, the room stood not in applause but in recognition. In respect. In reckoning. Claire met him in the hallway. Well, she said, you detonated it. I didn't detonate anything, John replied. I just stopped letting them step over it. What now? Now, he said. We see what survives the blast. 2 days later, the DOJ issued a full review of the Westfield department. Officer Sutton's previous complaints were unsealed. 5 use of force violations, all previously dismissed. All suddenly re-examined. Hensley declined to comment. The headlines turned. For once, not toward scandal but toward a name, Kennedy. Not as a symbol, not as a case study, but as a man who spoke plainly, stood firmly, and let the truth speak loud enough that the silence had nowhere left to hide. Thank you for watching this powerful story. John Kennedy didn't wear a cape. He didn't shout. He stood when it mattered most. In silence, in defiance, in truth. Stories like his remind us, justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks into a room and makes it go quiet. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Like this video, share it with someone who still believes in doing the right thing. Drop a comment below. Would you have stayed silent or spoken up like John? And if you're new here, subscribe to Endless Stories, where real courage never fades, and every story echoes long after the screen goes dark. Because truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be heard.